Welcome to the CAS Side Event on accelerating locally led adaptation, effective engagement across governance levels in the context of nationally determined contributions, NDCs, and the National Adaptation Plan, NAP process. So that's a long title to say something very simple. The simple thing is that climate adaptation is local, but climate change is planetary, and we need to find a way to square the circle of very specific local adaptation with a global problem. The second, I think, key element to put on the table here is that as somebody who has been to many of the Conference of the Parties, the COP meetings over the last decade, in fact, there has been a significant change in the way that scientists, environmentalists, forestry, earth, soil scientists, climatologists, etc., have been speaking. A decade or so ago, they were talking about what they hoped would happen. Now they are talking about what they fear is already happening. And it's too late, if we're brutally frank with each other, to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees. Climate change has now been going on measurably long enough that the models that were established 20 years ago are now playing out in real time. And so it's evident that the predictive capacity to show what is happening. And therefore you can extrapolate based on measured data what will continue to happen. So sorry, it's too late to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees. That means that adaptation to climate change becomes even more essential. Not saying, of course, that we shouldn't continue to try to limit the damage, but adaptation becomes even more essential. And it also means that it's too late for adaptation projects. Adaptation must be a regular daily practice, just like brushing one's teeth in the morning. Adaptation has to be part of life. It cannot be sidelines to side projects, initiatives that are outside of the mainstream activities of humans. So this is the bleak reality that we face, but all is not lost. There are many who are working on ways that we can adapt, and we can adapt using our daily activities, our daily expenditure, procurement, investment cycles, because of course humans have always adapted to climate change and always adapted to the climate. That's why we can live in a whole variety of different places around the globe. So we're not strangers to adapting to climate. Having said all of this, during this meeting, what we'll be doing is looking at some of the concrete ways in which we are able to locally adapt, because it's extremely local. The microclimate in a place like Bhutan changes from valley to valley. 20, 30, 40 kilometers makes a huge difference in terms of adaptation. So there need to be locally led decisions and investments, but global reporting, global standardization, and there are mechanisms now like the performance-based climate resilient grants, which are called different things in different countries, but which are actually driven by the 21 country local climate adaptive living facility, which is a global facility to enable local adaptation with global reporting. It's operated by the various countries that join and operate the facility, blending it in to their national ways of working, their national public expenditure management, and their national procurement systems. That is one example of the way in which we can locally adapt but report globally. So this session will discuss this issue, how we can mainstream adaptation, get it into the ways that we report on the Paris Agreement, and most importantly, make it part of our daily activities. We have a number of speakers. I'll just briefly introduce them and then go to the first speaker. Daniel Morchain, who is the policy advisor at the NAP, Global Networks Resilience Program. And he will be looking at, again, another technical title, the vertical integration of nationally determined contributions and NAP process, which will explain how it's important in terms of the verticality, meaning from central to local, meaning across the different subnational levels of governance, how to integrate the nationally determined contributions to the Paris Agreement. We will also be speaking to Sophie de Koning, who is the manager of the LoCAL facility that I just mentioned. And she will be explaining how LoCAL, which is hosted by the United Nations Capital Development Fund, of which I'm the Director of Local Development Finance, supports locally led adaptation, finance and implementation along the lines mentioned earlier. We will also have a great pleasure of talking to Sangay Dorji from Bhutan, who is a program officer in the Department of Local Governance at the Ministry of Home and Cultural Affairs in Bhutan, who will be telling us about Bhutan's experience in scaling up performance-based climate resilient grants for climate change adaptation and linking this to local government planning and what are the specific features behind the success. And then we will be speaking to Mr. Vatanek Cheng, who is Deputy Director of Program Management and Support Division at the National Committee for Subnational Democratic Development in the Royal Government of Cambodia, who will also be talking about Cambodia's experience in scaling up climate finance for locally led adaptation using government systems, and what advice he would give for other countries wishing to gain direct access to vertical funds such as the Green Climate Fund, because as mentioned earlier, this locally delivering globally reporting enables you to gain direct access to vertical funds such as the Green Climate Fund for local adaptation. And that is one of the issues we're addressing in this local climate adaptive living facility. So I think to start, I would like to pass the floor to Daniel Morchain, Policy Advisor at the NAP Global Network Resilience Program. Daniel, welcome, and the floor is yours.
Well, thanks so much, David, and thanks also for talking about the 1.5, because it's one of the first times that I hear, this realization, though it's been, I think, in many people's minds, including certainly mine, that the 1.5 is like almost a bit of a dream, and we have to realize that we have to continue working with the ambition of 1.5, but with a preparation for 2 degrees plus. I think that's really the set of mind that we should be having because of everything that you talked about. And that precisely is a great justification for recognizing the importance of subnational levels and really nailing down every time through messaging, through action, through policies, how really important work at subnational levels is, and how important it is that this kind of work is linked and well aligned with national level, or how you said, central government level work. That alignment has to happen, and that is what vertical integration means, right? It's basically the multi-level governance ways of working, and in relation particularly to adaptation, as we are in this session. So that's what I will be talking about in the next few minutes. I'm from the International Institute for Sustainable Development, which hosts the NAP Global Network, as you mentioned, David. So just a quick word on what is vertical integration or multi-level governance. It's the idea and the process of creating, and here the two keywords are intentional and strategic links between those different levels, between national level government, provincial, municipal, local, whatever the name, whatever names they have in a particular country, but making sure that the way that adaptation planning and adaptation implementation is thought of, is decided at all these levels, is done in a way that is linked in an intentional way and in a strategic way, so that projects don't seem at the local level to be random, haphazard, disconnected, but that they really can add up to something that tells a story, that helps create an adaptation story that connects to local level, from local level to national level, that makes sense and forms a strategy, right? That helps the learning that is happening at the small project level feed into bigger processes, and therefore to other local levels where the adaptation projects are not happening exactly at that moment, or where that adaptation project is not happening. And I should say that goes through all the project cycle, from design to monitoring and evaluation. And why should we do vertical integration? Well, David, you gave us some good ideas already, some good justifications, but let me add a few. Well, a simple one would be that the UNFCCC decisions call for engagement of national actors. So there is a mandate, so to speak, right? The second one is that, vertical integration is fundamental to key principles of adaptation that I think by now are almost universal, I dare say. So it allows us, by doing this kind of intentional, fair, just link and relationship between the different levels of governance, that is a vehicle to allow participation, transparency, gender equality, bringing vulnerable groups to the center of the discussion, of the decision making. So vertical integration really enables that. There is much implementation of happening in the case of adaptation at subnational level. Again, as David, you said in the introduction. So adaptation is local, and therefore we have to recognize, everyone has to recognize that taking decisions at national level, deciding things there, and then just indicating, mandating that at local level, it wouldn't really work. You have to understand that local level, because that's where things are happening. That's where you need to understand what kind of action is needed. And almost finally, there is plenty of evidence that locally driven approaches to adaptation are effective. So when we're talking here, in particular in this session, around the importance of funding, financing, well, effectiveness really, increases when you are working at local levels. And finally, I want to say that word around why vertical integration. Two things, or three words, legitimacy, then your efforts are really connected to people's needs, ownership at all levels, and validity of the national efforts. Like what I was saying, it's not very helpful, to do in an age of projectization. It's not very helpful to just have adaptation projects scattered all over the place unless they, are making sense at the national level, and then at that national level strategy also likewise flowing, and having that learning occur, and having the adaptation projects in one region, the lessons there be taken to another region. So just super quickly here, this is a little graph just highlighting the importance of working at all different levels, from community to subnational to national. But within it, I'll move to the next slide, because I just want to show you this. We have 4 enabling factors that, welcome and promote vertical integration. And the one that is not missing here is around financing. And I know other speakers will be talking about financing quite a bit. So you need financing to be happening, and not just at national level, but across different levels of governance, importantly at local level. And the other 3 are these that you can see here. So the first enabling factor I want to mention briefly is the institutional arrangements, the way that different institutions work together or don't work together. So that is really important and helps facilitate, coordinate, capacity building, information sharing. So that vehicle has to be there. You have to have institutions that have a mandate to work with one another, that have incentives to work with one another. The second one is around information sharing. And here we're talking about data, development needs, climate vulnerabilities, what are the adaptation options, and finally capacity development. That is, capacity development in every sense, from guidance, technical assistance, planning, but also I would here highlight that we're talking about capacity development in both ways, right? Not just of actors at subnational and local level, but also at national level, to understand how to work in this way. So thank you very much for the opportunity to introduce the subject, and over back to you, David. Thank you so much.
No, thank you very much indeed, Daniel. That was very clear, that explaining and demystifying what we mean by verticality and national integration. And you mentioned, the role of local governments there. And I think when we talk about efficiency and effectiveness of local adaptation, it's important to recognize that these are key actors that are not always really fully incorporated in thinking on climate change, because they are the people with the responsibility for road maintenance, for example, for water basin management, for a lot of the bread and butter, concrete things that need to happen to adapt to the climate, to the weather. And I think that mainstreaming local governments and seeing local government finance, local government investment, local capital investment as part of a way a nation can vertically integrate its climate finance is really an efficient way forward. And thank you as well for highlighting the roles of the different levels and the way that things come together. So that's a very nice overview that you presented of the architecture, if you like, for vertical integration. So I'd now like to hand the floor to Sophie de Koning, the facility of the manager of the local climate adaptive living facility, which Sophie manages on behalf of the countries that govern the facility. So Sophie, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, David. So indeed, I would like just to share a few slides on the local climate adaptive living facility, and you will hear into more details on its deployment from the colleagues from the countries from Bhutan and Cambodia. So essentially, the facility provides a mechanism to finance and support local level adaptation, working closely with local authorities and communities, and through those actors by supporting them, contributing to the implementation of the Paris Agreement, NDCs and NAPs, nationally determined contributions, national adaptation plans, and SDG 13 at the local level. So the starting point, like has been mentioned, is that local governments in LDCs, but also in other vulnerable countries, are very close to the population. They're well placed to actually grasp the local risk and the needs, but also by law, they have typically the mandate to undertake a number of small scale or medium sized investment that will contribute to climate change adaptation across the country. However, they typically face a lack of access to the climate finance and also other types of finance. But when it comes to climate finance, the situation is that the funds are typically accessed from central level, and when they are channeled down to local level, it's most often through project approaches or parallel systems than actually using government systems. So the whole idea here was to indeed leverage country systems for the purpose of climate change adaptation at the local level. Based on this, the idea is to, of course, help access, but also use effectively that climate finance to build verifiable climate adaptation. So the mechanism makes use of government systems, in particular local development planning and budgeting systems, and for that purpose use a specific instrument that has been called performance-based climate resilience grants, that is also accompanied through a dedicated monitoring and evaluation framework. So this slide is the core of the mechanism. So what is important to understand, if we go at the top part of the slide, is the channeling of the funds. So this mechanism is actually using intergovernmental fiscal transfer systems to channel the finance from the source of finance, which can be domestic or international, development or climate, depending on the moment in the deployment of the mechanism, channeling it to local governments in addition to regular capital grant allocation that local governments might get. So there is this element of additionality, and the grants are calculated based on a transparent formula that is performance-based. With that in mind, the local governments can then use that additional finance together with other sources of finance that they might have at their disposal. So now if we move to the bottom part of the diagram, you will see that local governments are invited to meet minimum conditions before they embark. So they're not selected based on those conditions, but it's important that they comply with them with a view to ensure some basic capacities before to get started, but also to ensure the good use of the funds from year to year. So that gives confidence to central government, which in a number of countries is co-financing the grants, but also to international source of finance. The local governments can then use their grants according to an investment menu. I will come to it in the next slide. And they're also invited to work against a set of pre-agreed target indicators that we call performance measures. So roughly half of those performance measures, and they will vary in every country, relate to climate change adaptation, but also to other important cross-cutting issues such as gender equality, environmental and social safeguards, good governance, and the good execution of the grant. So there is an element also of financial reporting, accountability, transparency, all important elements for climate change and development. The local governments are then assessed every year. That is item 2 here on the at the bottom part of the diagram. Every year assessed through an exercise that is called annual performance assessment, which is third-party neutral, involving central government, because eventually they are the owner of this mechanism, of this country-based system. And the results of the performance assessment will feed back into the formula. So the better performers will receive a slightly higher grants, and vice versa. So it creates a positive emulation amongst local governments, which are then also accompanied, and the results of the assessment will also inform technical and capacity building support for the local governments, the communities, but also at central level, like was mentioned also by Daniel. The local governments will be invited to work against a menu. The menu is aligned with their mandates, but also with the NDCs or the NAP, and it cuts across climate sensitive sectors. So this is an example from the Gambia, but each country, possibly at some point, each sub-region will have its own menu, and which cuts across, for example, in this case, nature-based solutions, agriculture, water, infrastructure, and small-scale energy. So now what might be of interest is to understand how the local progress from phase to phase and the current footprint of this local mechanism. So the countries start in what we call phase 1, which is testing all these elements on a small scale with a limited number of local governments, for example, up to 5 over 1 or 2 cycle of investment. So that enables to check everything that you've seen on the visual, the flow of fund, the menu, the minimum conditions, the performance measure, and the formula. Then countries move to phase 2, which is consolidating, working on a larger scale in different ecosystems and running these annual performance assessments, as well as the capacity building on a larger scale, which can go to over than 5, 10, 15, up to 70 union parishad in Bangladesh. And then countries move to phase 3. You will hear in a moment from Bhutan and Cambodia colleagues. At that point, the mechanism is used by various partners on a large scale, and the government is really completely operating the mechanism. So if you remember the visual, there might be various sources of finance coming into the same mechanism, which is effectively a country system by that point. And then on this map, you see a number of countries in blue. Those are all candidate countries, which means that they are actively preparing to join the mechanism, undertaking scoping exercises, design, really looking at how the mechanism will be crafted for their own country specificities. So what might be of interest as well is that the experience of the first generation of countries, the first dozen countries or so, has been collected and documented in this publication that you see here on the left side, which was endorsed by the LDC expert group to the UNFCCC as supplementary material to the National Adaptation Plan technical guidelines. And the countries are now going through the effort of making it an ISO standard. We mentioned this phase 3 and also the various options to actually finance the grants and activate the mechanism. So countries are importantly supported towards their effort towards direct access to international climate funds. So a number of countries have been supported in terms of accrediting a national implementing entity. You will hear in a moment from Bhutan and Cambodia, which have successfully gone through the accreditation process to Adaptation Fund and Green Climate Fund, as well as Benin, and other countries are accompanied to do so. So these countries are now going through the direct access modality, preparing concept note to Green Climate Fund with support from the local mechanism, and more are actually joining these efforts. Some countries are also federating efforts, working through a regional direct access entity, such as West African Development Bank in West Africa with 4 countries, as well as with the Secretariat of the Pacific Community in the Pacific. So all in all, it's about a dozen countries going to Green Climate Fund for about 10 million each, so which could double the size of the initiative over the next few years. So you will hear in a moment from Bhutan and Cambodia. So I won't go on to those cases, but another example that I would like to share is the example of Benin, which was indeed accredited to the Green Climate Fund, scaling up to 9 communes, but will be looking at going to 30 communes next with Green Climate Fund. But importantly, Benin has been co-financing the mechanism through the National Fund for Environment and Climate using eco-taxes. So after 1 year of operation, the government started co-financing itself. And I think that's also an interesting model to complement other sources of finance, which can be, again, climate finance, but also domestic resources for that purpose. So I will stop here. Just like David mentioned at the beginning, it's important to know that this initiative is governed by the countries that are a member of it. They form a board of countries, but the board also welcomed a number of observers, including some of the main funders to the initiative, as well as technical partners, in particular EU, the government of Sweden, the Green Climate Fund, and UNFCCC. Thank you.
So thank you much, Sophie, for explaining how the local climate adaptive living facility works as a plug-in, if you like, to national country systems and national fiscal decentralization arrangements. So let's hear now how this works in practice. We will first go to Bhutan, then we'll go to Cambodia. Both of these countries have been implementing the local climate adaptive living facility for many years now. And first, Sangay Dorgi, the program officer at the Department of Local Governance at the Ministry of Home and Cultural Affairs in Bhutan, will explain to us how this works in Bhutan. So, Sangay, how are you adapting locally but reporting nationally in Bhutan? Over to you.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone, and greetings from Bhutan. Thank you, David, sir, and UNCDF for the opportunity for inviting me for this site event on accelerating the locally led adaptation for effective engagement across governance level in the context of NDCs and NAP processes. As you have introduced, I'm Sangay Dorgi from Bhutan, and pleased to take this forum to share the experience of Bhutan on integrating the climate change and GECDP, which is Gender, Environment, Climate, Disaster and Poverty, into local development planning and budgeting system. To start with, I would like to highlight that Bhutan, as a mountainous and landlocked country, the impact of climate change is higher compared to others. The Bhutan's economy is highly dependent on climate-sensitive sectors such as agriculture and hydropower and others, so on. And the climate change has led to changing weather patterns and increased hydrometeorological extremes such as floods, flash floods, among others. However, Bhutan does not have a data on climate, and research on climate has remained as the challenge for Bhutan. This is the projection of a temperature change scenario in Bhutan, where summer temperature is expected to increase moderately, while the winter temperature is expected at a higher rate. Similarly, for the precipitation, it is expected as a wetter in the monsoon season and drier in the winter. And Bhutan also experienced the impacts of climate change on different sectors, such as agriculture, hydropower, infrastructure, water sector, forest and biodiversity, and health sector. So in order to address the above mentioned impacts of the climate change in Bhutan, the LoCAL, through the support of UNCDF, started in 2011, along with Cambodia as the pilot program, through the performance-based mechanism, focusing on climate change adaptation. So following the success of the pilot program, the bridging phase of the PBCRG program was started in 2014, with increase in the number of local governments for its implementation. So we had 6 local governments implementing the local program during the bridging phase, which was for 2 years until 2016, with the support from the UNCDF. So the concept of a program for the performance base is purely based on the performance of the local governments implementing the LoCAL program. So it is initially, in the initial year, so every local government identified for implementation of PBCRG were given more or less the equal budget, which is approximately 15 to 25% over and above the annual capital grant. However, in the following year, their allocation is based on their performance, where they get more share if they perform well and vice versa. So as indicated in the logical model in the presentation slide. So currently we are in the phase 3, where we implement this program in 100 local governments or the 100 kiosks. The PBCRG is implemented as one of the component of mainstreaming GECDP, which is Gender, Environment, Climate, Disaster, and Poverty. The GECDP concept is being integrated during the time of local planning and budgeting, and it is a bottom-up approach here in Bhutan. Regards to planning, where all the community members are involved and consulted before the plan and budget is being submitted to the central government. I also would like to highlight on why we have to address the issues of the climate change in the local governments, or the local government versus the climate change adaptation. The consequences of the climate change are most directly and severely felt at the local governments, and the local governments are the best place to help the local communities in order to adapt and address the many consequences of the climate change. And climate change adaptation is often a highly localized matter. So different localities may experience different climate change challenges. Further, the climate change problems may differ between men and women, rich and poor, old and young, and between the livelihoods. It is also because of their proximity to the local communities. The local governments have comparative advantages in terms of access to local knowledge, ability to mobilize the local communities, and delivery of public goods and services in order to respond to the climate change impacts. Climate change adaptation also involves extra costs, and the conventional planning and budgeting system rarely takes into the account of climate change adaptation measures and costs. The topping up through the local support as the extra cost will enable the local governments to respond to climate change adaptation needs effectively. And it is also through the accountability and tangible incentives, it is expected that local governments shall improve their performance in the utilization of their grants. And some of the climate change adaptation impacts or the activities addressing the mainstream of GECDP are like irrigation channel, farm road, the drinking water, integrated soil management, and land management. So all with the concept of climate change adaptation. So these are some of the highlights or some of the success stories in Bhutan, like kind of enhancing the irrigation system and like elevated bridge for the communities. So those are some of the highlights of the success stories in Bhutan. So thank you so much from Bhutan.
Well, thank you so much indeed as well, Sangay. That's very clear. And the way you described the expansion of the performance-based climate resilient grant system to now to over 100 local governments, and the way you provided details as to how Bhutan as a country has adopted and mainstreamed this way of working into your national planning and budgeting and local government investments programs. I think the key element we take from what you've said is that each country must adapt not only to climate change, but must adapt its own financing in a way appropriate for that country, and there to be able to deliver locally, report globally, and mainstream climate adaptation. And so to that end, I would like to go to our next speaker from the government of Cambodia, Mr. Vatanek Cheng. And Cambodia, like Bhutan, has now secured direct access to the Green Climate Fund for taking further to scale this local adaptation. So over to you, Mr. Cheng. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much, David, and thank you for the previous presenter for the introduction to our climate change issue. So Cambodia has been very privileged in the past decade to be really involved in a lot of climate change actions, project and program. Some of the lessons learned that we had from implementing and as well as engaging with partner was to test different type of modality on climate change adaptation project. And through those implementation, there's a lot of lesson learned that we had gathered. So some of the highlight that you will see here is some of the collective core messages that we compile in order to help scale up our climate change finances to our local government. So the theme of the topic today is how did the government really implement this action plan? So we, like Bhutan, Cambodia was implemented a pilot project with the support from UNCDF on this finance mechanism called LoCAL modality. And that was the first project that we had adapted and then introduced to our local government in order to help to integrate climate change adaptation planning into their commune and district budgeting, planning, and investment. So from the pilot project, Cambodia, particularly the UNCDF agency has a privilege to work with a number of other partners regarding various adaptation program and project. Some of it is from the lesson learned that we learned from LoCAL through their pilot stages. And then a number of other projects has been new introduction regarding different type of technology intervention, as well as different fiscal modality model, such as guarantee fund. This was also introduced as well. Other core message that we want to introduce as well is our participation with other line ministry. It's quite important that on a national level that the related ministry are having the discussion on climate change and then committed to the action plan that has been brought up to UNFCCC. So every year, Cambodia take part of these conversations, and NCDDS do play an active role in terms of participating and organizing a workshop, and as well as contributing to this input. And then without a strong guideline, as well as priority, all these projects would not become a success. So country policy is quite important. We need to be able to communicate to our stakeholders and also those that are being implemented, a clear vision of what is the country priority are. So being an alignment to the Ministry of Environment adaptation plans on climate change is quite relevant. And then last but not least is our key message in terms of climate change financing to the government is a partnership. So a number of the modality that we introduced in Cambodia, whether it's through pilot tests or through scale up, is the partnership. So strong introduction to private sectors, such as financial institutions and local NGO and the community, help build the confidence on the grassroots level in order to scale up the pilot test into different phases. So to bridge to the concept here is a quick introduction to our local highlight. As mentioned earlier, the key success to our implementation was to have a clear defined project that has already been implemented in a number of provinces. So the LoCAL was introduced in 2011, and then we scaled this up into a number of phases. Cross-sector collaboration with different development partners such as IFAD and UNDP was the benefit that bridges the pilot test into its next success development. And from the success of the LoCAL helped Cambodia to learn and capture some of the experience that needed to build its capacity and in terms of system development, as well as access to key reliable data in order to use the success to access to other vertical finances such as the Global Fund Initiative. So some of the initiative that Cambodia is looking at now that we have pilot experience implemented, is how do we get the access to finance from a global level to the local government. So one of the initiative is to commit ourselves to being able to get access to the Green Climate Fund. The conversation started back in early 2017. It took some year for us to get the accreditation, but with support from our partners, especially from the development partners, we are able to get accreditation. And it's a commitment that the NCDDS has to engage on both stakeholder, especially the Ministry of Environment, which is the national designated agency, as well as the Green Climate Fund. The process itself is quite lengthy. There are a number of steps that you have to implement in order to get accreditations. On this slide here, it kind of showcases some of the plan that was taken by NCDDS. Once the accreditation is completed, there are a number of requirements for the country to adapt in order to fulfill the need of the GCF. So two requirements are particularly important, is to have a clear guideline of strategic plan of what's the country are planning to do in order to address their climate change issue, whether it's mitigation and adaptation. For Cambodia, there are two main players that take role in this. The NDA, which is managed by, which is the Ministry of Environment, are responsible for providing priority sectors, as well as giving a policy overview of how climate change financing would address which prioritized sectors. In terms of the accredited entity as ourselves, we need to provide what we call is a roadmap development in terms of pipeline. So entity work program is some of the development that we engage in order to get input from our relevant stakeholder, as well as discussing with the local government in terms of their prior need in the issue of climate change. So the formulation of the program would help to provide a substantial message to the GCF in order for them to understand what are the priority for the next 2 years, as well as for the next 5 years. Now, in parallel to developing a project pipeline to the GCF, Cambodia also has to address some of the accreditations that is pending. So in terms of accreditation, there are a number of other steps we have to fulfill as well. So GCF is a global fund that have other facility resources that country can access to, such as readiness and preparatory support. So we have submitted readiness support to the GCF in order to address those gaps, in order to bring the accreditation to its completion. And then just to tie it all up, so the LoCAL project that we implemented with the UNCDF back in 2011, in our process of scaling up is the key project that we are submitting to the GCF in order to expand our financing capability, in order to channel that down to our local government. So to wrap it all up, Cambodia, in a sense, has come a long way from its initial pilot stage, and in getting the experience through program and project implementations, and using that experience to build its capacity and institutional readiness in order to get its accreditations to a global climate initiative such as the GCF. So that's kind of wrap up the experience from Cambodia. Back to you, David. Thank you.
Thank you so much indeed. That's very clear, and it's really interesting to close now these presentations with the vision that you've presented as to how a country like Cambodia can use this platform of local adaptation and then consolidated reporting to gain access to Green Climate Fund, for example, and others to take it even further, and to really meet the objective that we spoke about at the beginning of this meeting, which is how to adapt locally, report globally, and really mainstream into our daily ways of governing ourselves, of investing, of managing our resources, adaptation. Because as we said at the beginning, it's too late to limit global warming. It's a reality, and we as society, as human beings on the planet, need to find a way to adapt, as we have always done, to this new reality. So thank you so much indeed, colleagues, all of you. And we'll now end the recorded part of this meeting. And I hope you will be able to talk to us in real time in literally a few moments. So we'll have a kind of, if you like, get the band back together and reconvene the panel now to be able to speak to you in real time and answer any questions you may have. So thank you very much indeed for listening to our recording.